Spent the last couple of weeks doing a lot of series of blogs and videos about property tax time, trying to educate everybody this time of year because property tax bills are due. And there seems to be a lot of confusion still about just how property taxes work and the rates. And I'll be honest, if I was an elected official, I'd be just as confused or more confused than the rest of you. So I'm going to break it down for you here in a simple way and comparing 24 to 25. So your property tax bill has several components on the backside that make up the payment. For convenience sake, fiscal court collects the payment up front from your mortgage company to save from sending out several different checks to different taxing authorities, or to save you, if you don't have a mortgage or escrow, from doing the same thing. And then it funnels out the backside to different entities. For example, the school board takes up the largest portion of the tax bill. They charge over 670% more than what here at fiscal court where I serve charge. The state of Kentucky has a portion of the tax bill, along with the health department, library board, extension services, also have pieces of the tax bill. But from 24 to 25, I kind of did a little synopsis here. In fiscal court where I serve, we lowered your tax bill, our portion, by over 7.5%. The school board this year raised their portion of the tax bill just over 4.5%. The health department, the library board, and depending on where you live, but where I live in non-incorporated Florence, the fire district, they all stayed flat as far as the rates are concerned. Where your bill may have changed was if you had a raise in property value assessment, which is the PBA's office, which I've also done some videos on just how that piece works. The PBA may have raised your assessment, which if you have a higher value, then no matter what the rate is, it could impact and pay more there. The school board, being such a large portion, the lion's share over more than anybody else on the tax bill, when they raise it by 4.5%, that's going to have a larger impact than, say, someone where fiscal court has a small piece, lowers it. My goal with all of this is not to make it a statement of opinion or advocacy for any of these taxes. My goal is to just be transparent and help educate, to help you understand what it is you're paying for and, more importantly, who you're paying. So when there is an issue, or if you do have a concern, or you want to bring up questions, you hopefully know where to go to get and seek those answers.
So today we have Jonathan Brown. He's our Boone County Property Valuation Administrator. He's going to go through some steps on the assessment, what PVA is all about, and anything else tax related. And what does the PVA do?
Yeah, the primary, it's pretty much in the name, Property Valuation Administrator or Administration. We determine value. That's by far the biggest part of our job. There's some other minor things we do, but we determine value. So property taxes, there are two sides of the coin on your property taxes. You have the property value and you have the tax rate. The districts, the county, the city, the fire districts, etc. Library is one, the health department, etc. There's a couple other smaller ones. They set tax rates every year, but the valuation portion comes from us. Typically, the Kentucky Constitution requires us to value things at 100% fair tax value. It's in the Constitution since Section 172. So if you bought your house recently, or a commercial property too, then what you paid for it is probably what it's going to be valued at least for the couple years thereafter. But when things haven't been sold in many years, obviously the values have gone up most likely since then. So that's where we come in and have to revalue something to make sure that it's in balance with the folks that have just sold. Or just bought, I should say. Let me jump into something else too, because I think it's also important to mention a couple of things or not, because people do get confused. We don't set the tax rates. We don't collect any taxes, and this office receives absolutely no revenue or income increases by increasing any tax values, or I should say property values that go into your tax calculations. We're trying to hit that as close to we aim for the lower side of fair market value because there's certain restrictions, and we'll get into that. But we're just trying to hit that fair market value because in the end, we get overseen the State Department of Revenue. Technically, as a PVA, I'm an officer of the State Department of Revenue, and they have oversight over everything we do. So if we don't hit certain numbers, they reserve the right to come in and overrule me, and will raise things. They won't be nearly as fair as I will be locally. is the issue. So every year we're just trying to barely make that what they're making us raise to. And there's a whole set of formulas that goes into what that is. But in the end, we're trying to get to that point and not put any extra burden on people that we don't have to.
So is that the third bullet point? So what you just
I probably skipped around a little bit. Is how that to see property assessments, how it's implemented locally and by whom. Yeah, I would also say, that's probably covering that third bullet point. We can talk when we'll get down here. We'll talk about how the whole process works. But yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then how can assessments be changed in the future, like the process? Is that through legislation?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. Yes, our entire process is dictated by statute. So any changes in how we do it would have to go through legislation through the legislature, because basically every aspect of what we do is dictated by an existing statute. Kentucky is on what we call a quadrennial review plan. So under normal circumstances, typically you can expect to get reassessed once every 4 years. We have to submit a plan to the state that shows how we're going to get to all roughly 60,000 parcels in this county in a 4-year time period. That is done by basically map of where each year is. Now, there are other things that can be involved that might make you fall outside of that 4-year cycle. For instance, if you sold your house or if you bought a new house, then you're going to get reassessed upon when you bought it, or if you added a room on the back of your house or something like that and took out a permit for it, we would get notice of that too. So if you did something that obviously changed your value, might come up between the cycles, but generally everyone is generally on a 4-year cycle. And that 4-year cycle involves us, throughout the year. I have field crews that are going out and we visit properties to see if anything has changed in the last 4 years. We do a lot of our inspections virtually now because there's good enough aerial photography and tools that we can measure with to see if there's been an addition on a building or something like that. When my crews do come out, they're typically just taking a picture of the front of the house just to update our records to make sure and take a quick look to make sure nothing's changed and it matches what they saw in our online systems. If it does look like something's changed, they'll knock on your door and maybe take a couple measurements and tell you what they're doing and take a measurement or two of the outside of the house just to make sure our information is correct. We don't go in the house. By statute, we're supposed to stay outside. I mean, people will occasionally try and invite us in to show us something, and we always tell them, look, for insurance reasons and everything, we're not supposed to go in houses. So, I mean, not to say that we haven't stood in a doorway and taken a picture of a cracked wall or something from the door, but for the most part, we stay outside. But we'll ask the homeowner to submit pictures if there's something, it's like a major foundational issue or something like that that's going to affect the value, because we definitely want to know about that. So, and then I guess I'll just keep going through the process here. So those field inspections go through the year round. And then January 1 of each year is our assessment date. So we assess houses based on their value as of January 1. Those first couple months of the year, we're taking that information, we're plugging it into our system, we're looking at comparable sales in the area. And a lot of times we kind of do valuations in two different methods. And where there are subdivisions and where there's a lot of comparable sales in neighborhoods, we use what's called CAMA, computer aided mass assessment, which is we have models built for those neighborhoods. We enter in the sales data, and the computer takes the first crack at placing a value on it based on square foot, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and things of that nature. An assessor always looks at everything the computer does, someone actually looks at before it actually gets posted as a value. So after the computer makes the initial run, we go through them individually. That's what we use on most places, because most of the houses can fall into that. More rural areas where there's not as many comparable sales, we end up having to do them individually, and that's done straight by an assessor looking at existing sales in the area or similar homes in maybe other parts of the county that are similarly situated. So, and then based on those new values, you get usually in the beginning of the year, starting probably in the early side, late February, more likely early to mid-March, we will start sending out reassessment notices to those people who are affected. And we try and get them out as soon as we can. Technically, by statute, there's a lot of counties in the state that the appeals period is in May. Technically, we don't have to send out those reassessment letters till the week before, and then everyone has, by statute, 2 weeks to get all their stuff together to appeal. That happens in a lot of places in the state. It doesn't happen here. We try to send those out as early as we possibly can, particularly the residential ones. And we start sending those out in March and April, and that builds to the appeals period that is in May. Just so to clarify, I've been talking a lot about residential. Commercial is on the same thing as residential. So they're getting notices about the same time residentials are, and it's all at the same time. So there's not a difference in residential versus commercial from our end.
Same process.
Same process.
I was kind of looking online to see what the process looked like from residential to commercial. There's not a whole lot of difference, just a little bit more information.
It's the biggest difference is it's a little harder in commercial to find comparable sales sometimes because you've got some really unique commercial things. So sometimes we have to value those in different ways. We can do it by construction cost estimation methods. We can do it by, if we get there, sometimes they'll submit their income, what they're making off the property. Not necessarily, I'm going to say I always believe what they tell me they're making off the property, but it's at least a tool because there is an income capitalization method that you can use to kind of back into a property value. So it's at least a good check to see if we're on the right track. You had asked a question about whether corporations, there are a number of corporations buying up homes. Those are treated just like any other residential. They're not getting any additional tax breaks. They are paying the full rate just like everybody else is, and they are getting reassessed just like everybody else is. It's just that, honestly, in our system, unless we look at what the mailing address is, we wouldn't even know if that it was one. So, I mean, if it's got a corporate email address, then it's probably a corporately owned property, but we're just assessing houses, and then we, the notices get mailed to what we have on file. Now, there is a little bit of you asked about looking at a corporation into those. No, they don't receive tax break. Now, like you talk about commercial properties, though, is Amazon and other large corporations paying the taxes, or are they receiving a tax break? I don't think Amazon is. There are a small number of major commercial properties and industrial properties in the county that they came into the county. This is mainly something that was happening more like 10 plus years ago. They would give them tax rebates for relocating here, and some of those are still in effect. There's something, it's called, one of the programs is called an industrial revenue bond, I should say. And what that does is gives them a break on their property taxes for a number of years. And it's usually a graduated scale that over the course of 20 years, they start paying. In the beginning, they're paying very little in property taxes. And as they get to the end of that 20 year, they're paying more. And they're still paying the full state rate, but it gives them a break on some of the local rates. There's only a handful of those, I think, probably off the top of my head. I don't have them in front of me, but 7 or 8, maybe 10 at the most that I can think of. There are also some more recently, rather than doing those, what we call IRBs, industrial revenue bonds, some of the counties and the cities have on occasion done what we call pilot payments, where and the example for this would be, say, Turfway Racetrack has one the city of Florence did when they redid and put in the casino operation there a couple of years ago. Technically, that land right now is titled in the name of the city of Florence. So because it's city property, it's exempt. But because the city took out the bonds and borrowed the money for them at a lesser rate, they are then paying back. They do something called a pilot payment, a payment in lieu of taxes. And that gets administered by the city. And basically they're paying a percentage of what they would have paid on property taxes to the various districts. Those go through our office to a certain degree, but a lot of that is administered by the city. And the same thing, that same kind of program is happening. The other one that's off the top of my head right now is in Union, the Union Promenade development. That one, the city of Union did that, and they have a bond administrator who does all of those there. That one actually doesn't come through my office at all. We still set values on all those, and they still pay a rate based on the values we set. But depending on what their pilot agreement was with the cities, it's usually a percentage of what what they would have been paying to the districts if they was just paying a straight tax rate. And the way these things are set up is after they pay those bonds back, usually in a 20-year period, then the property flips to being owned by them, not the city. And at that point, they'll be getting a full tax bill.
Increased taxes, even though there's massive development all over Boone County, whether it's commercial or residential, the taxes are still going up.
There's a couple angles on that as far with property taxes. As we raise from our side here, we're just doing the value. In my mind, I know look, I'm not going to sit here and deny that raising values doesn't raise people's tax bill. It does. I can sit here and say that, I'm not the one raising taxes. I'm not, but on an individual basis, I can understand why people would think why I am. But in the end, what we're trying to do, the way the system is set up, love it or hate it, is that we have to keep raising those things to maintain the balance between people who are fully valued because they just bought recently versus people who have on the property for 20 or 30 years, and therefore if they were paying what they paid for it, it would be, grossly undervalued. So, for lack of a better term, I don't like this terminology, but making sure everyone's paying their fair share, because that terminology gets brought into a bunch of other stuff sometimes. But that's really what we're doing. Now, the way our tax system works in Kentucky, though, is when you do increase assessments, it usually ends up resulting in a decrease in the tax rate, because there is something we call House Bill 44 that was from many, many years ago, that each district is only allowed to bring in each district, whether it be the county, the city, the fire district, etc., is only allowed to bring in 4% more revenue than they brought in the year before. If they set a tax rate that brings in more than that, then it's subject to a recall vote. So what happens each year is, when the new assessments come out, the Department of Local Government at the state will send every district what's called a compensating rate. And that is the rate that if you set your tax rate at this, you'll bring in the same amount of revenue that you did last year. Now, because almost assuredly the values have gone up, that compensating rate is almost always lower than what the rate would have been the year before. They also send them a plus 4% rate, which is how far they're allowed to raise in order to make 4% more. And that we'll come back to this in a minute, but that excludes new construction, which I'll explain what that means in a minute. But so they can get up to 4% more. If they do more than that, then they're subject to a local recall. And I can't recall anyone ever doing more than 4% and subjecting themselves to a local recall, because frankly, they'd lose. And they know that.
Back in 2008, when there was a housing crisis, in that kind of situation, because we anticipate there's going to be another one in the future, are the reevaluations then set on the collapse of the market as well? Like, or do we need to anticipate when you buy a house, it's constantly going to be valued more and more every year, so that you can expect increases constantly?
Yeah. No, it's in 2000. Now, I wasn't in the office here in 2008, 2009, but no, values definitely went down in that period. So during that period, if the market collapses, yes, we're going to base it off of recent sales. And if the recent sales are less than what you paid for it, then there's a good chance you should be going down. So I would agree with you, though. If you look at our sales averages over the last couple of years, it's been skyrocketing here. I will say that in 22 and 23, that number kind of held steady as far as the average sales price goes. So it wouldn't completely surprise me if we start seeing some dipping in 24. But right now it held steady, but the volume has definitely fallen way off.
And then, is there anything in the KRS that puts a cap on how much you can increase someone's property by either a percentage or an amount? So if someone comes in here in my neighborhood and they're all of a sudden like, every house is worth $1 million.
Yeah.
There's not. Okay.
There's not. I mean, practically, again, we're supposed to be shooting for fair market value. And if I was to call the State Department of Revenue, they would say, put them at fair market value. And, no matter how big the increase is, we try and have some common sense here. I'm not sure my people know, when we look at it, sometimes the market's going crazy and there's just no way, if we increased everyone to fair market value, the parking lot would be full of pitchforks and torches, and I understand that. So we try and get there slowly, and even when people come in, we're going to talk about the appeals process, but it's not uncommon for us if you've gotten a very big increase because maybe for some reason you got it. It doesn't happen a lot, but for some reason you didn't get changed 4 years ago, and all of a sudden you're getting 8 years of change in 1 year. We have in the past phased those in over the course of a year or two, or a couple of years, and so there's nothing in statutes, but we try and handle that on a local level with common sense and try not to, crush people, because we understand the practicality of it too.
The Sheriff's Department as well as Fire EMS, how do we plan to accommodate with all this additional people development here in Boone County?
Yeah, that actually works pretty nicely with what we were talking about a minute ago. I mean, I can't necessarily speak to logistically what fire and the sheriff are going to be doing internal operations, but just as a property tax funding thing, when I was mentioning House Bill 44 earlier about only being able to bring in 4% more revenue than they did in the previous year, that doesn't apply to new construction. So if there is $100 million apartment complex developed in an area, that increase in assessment, where it went from being vacant land that was worth, I don't know, a couple $100,000, maybe $1 million, to a apartment development that's worth way more than that number does not get set against that. So all of that property value increase is new tax revenue. So to that end, the sheriff and or the fire EMS are going to be gaining more money from those new developments. Now, I can't tell you whether that's necessarily enough to handle it or not. That's a fire EMS and sheriff's department question. But just from a standpoint of property taxes, it is at least nominally set into our system, into the formula that as new stuff comes in, it doesn't count against those districts.
How do we appeal if we want to?
Yeah. So there's a couple things here. While we're on the front page here, before I jump into the appeal, I will just say, because it's right here on the front page, anyone who comes to our website at boonepva.ky.gov, if you want to know what your assessment is, you can just type your address into that search bar right in the front, and it'll take you right to your property, and it'll give you you'll see a picture of your property, and it'll list all the pertinent information on the side. You can check yours, you can check your neighbors, you can check anybody's. Now, as far as appealing goes, if you look to the left there of that search bar, it says appeal your property value. If you click on that, it'll take you to this page. This is I'll summarize this process, but it has a detailed explanation of the process. And you'll see right there in the middle of the page, there are 3 links, one for residential property, one for commercial property, and one for ag property. And you would click on those, it'll open a web form, and you'll fill in the information. There's a way for you to attach documentation to this, and then this will go to my people. So we open this web portal as soon as tax bills go out the previous year, even though at that point it's too late to appeal that previous year's taxes. In fact, when they come out in October, we open these appeals because that's when people start realizing sometimes that they didn't really read the property assessment that came out several months before that. So we open that up. They can start doing these, fill this out, put in information, pictures, if you've got estimates because you have repairs that need to be done, or if there's something unique to your house that we just don't know because we're dealing with it from the outside, or if you know there's been some new sales in your neighborhood that maybe we didn't have, that we didn't realize or that have happened more recently than when we said it originally. If, for instance, the market is going down, like Stacy said, that starts to happen, then by all means, we're happy to look at it. So in that process, you would fill this out. This would get sent to my people. Usually just after the first year, we start going through these, and we will give you a call. We'll set up a time we usually start off by email, but we can do it by phone or in person, even if you wanted to. But we will talk to you. We'll get the information from you. See if there's something we can if there's a way for us to bring you down a little bit. We're trying to help people to the best extent we can. Sometimes we're in situations where the pumps are what they are, and our hands are kind of tied because, as I said, I get reviewed and audited on this from the Department of Revenue. So we have limits on how much we can help, but we try and help as much as we can. Just particularly in residential, I can say that the next step beyond this, which is appealing to the local board, which we'll talk about in a second, very few residential properties make it to that point because of the work we do on the conference side to try and work with property owners to try and come to some kind of mutual agreement on a reasonable number. By far, most people, I understand, as I tell everyone, one of the downsides of this job is, whereas everyone else is getting reassessed every year, my house gets reassessed every single year because it gets done by the Board of Appeals. So I know the pain too, and none of us like paying more taxes. But for the most part, when we talk to people, they understand that it's part of the process, and we try and help where we can, and certainly try and find exemptions if they can apply for any exemptions and things like that, which we'll talk about probably towards the end. But so the process though, that's the first part, is filling that out. We'll call you, we'll talk to you. That's considered an appeals conference. By statute, you have to have a conference with us before you can actually appeal to the local Board of Assessment Appeals. So once you've talked to us, one of two things will come out of that. We'll probably offer you a reduction if we can, or we'll tell you that maybe you just bought the house, and yes, I understand you think you probably overpaid for it, but if that's the price you just bought it for, there's not a lot we can do. Now, we'll either agree or disagree, and at the end of that process, we'll give you a form. We'll email it to you or give it to you in person that says you had a conference with us. If you still disagree with that price, you can go to the county clerk's office across the hall from us and file the appeal with them. They have a form you have to fill out too, but in general, you take our form, fill out their one-page form, and they'll put you on the list to go before the County Board of Assessment Appeals. That board meets in June, and it's 3 people. The one person is appointed by the judge executive, one person is appointed by the fiscal court, and one person is appointed by the mayor of a large city, which is in our case Florence. Those three people, and then they rotate on and off each year. One new person comes on each year. And it's typically people, a lot of times retired real estate agents or mortgage bankers who have experience in home valuation issues. And they'll hear the appeal. And they'll make a decision and either go with the value we had or the value that frankly, they can do whatever they want. They can go with the value that I had put on it. They can go with the value that the homeowner said. They can go anywhere in between. And I do believe that, I know they don't typically do this, but they could technically go higher or lower than either of us asked for if they wanted to. If you are dissatisfied with that board decision, you can appeal it to the State Board of Appeals. The State Board of Appeals is I believe it's also a 3-member body that's appointed by the governor. And they meet in Frankfurt throughout the year. And that process takes a little while because they have a ton of cases. Usually residential cases very, very, very rarely make it to the State Board of Appeals. Most of the things making it to them are large commercial properties where you're talking about millions of dollars of valuation. And because there is a process down there, and most people for the couple $100 they're going to save on a residential property don't find it worth their while. And in the end, if you're still not satisfied with what the state board comes up with, you can appeal it to your local circuit court, and then the entire court process is available to you, where you can have a trial in front of the circuit court and appeal them to the Court of Appeals, appeal them to the Supreme Court of Kentucky. But again, that's extremely rare. But most part, the vast majority of cases get settled in our conferences or certainly by the local Board of Appeals. We actually don't have any cases in front of the State Board of Appeals right now. When I came in office, we had 2, but those have both since been resolved and settled. That they were 2 commercial properties that were at the state board level from my predecessor. And not to say we might not get 1 or 2 this year, because we did, for the record, I want residential property owners to know that we hit commercial as hard or harder than we did. There's a residential, I would actually say absolutely harder than we hit residential this year. So that is the appeals process. As far as deadline goes, you have to have that conference with us before there's something called an open inspection period that's set by statute. We have to have our conferences during that or before it. And then the deadline for filing your appeal is usually the day after that. That's just kind of a standard appraisal form, I think, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. It's, if you can just, it's something that if you know there's sales there, it's just the major improvement points on a house that have the biggest effect on value. Square footage, how many cars, garage, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, heating, air. Those all have varying degrees of effect on your house, but it's so that we can, when we're looking at a sales comparison, we can, add or discount things to appropriately make sure that we're matching the house up. I would think most smooth challenges usually settle during the conference period. You would fill that thing out you'd fill that web form out. It would come to my people. They'll send you an initial email, and you'll go back and forth once or twice probably. And that is by far how the vast, vast majority of things are resolved. In occasion, I tend to focus mainly. I don't necessarily do the conferences myself. My staff does most of them. I'll do a couple here or there on residential, unless it gets to a point where they're just not sure and they need me to come in. I tend to be doing the commercial ones because the commercial people bring in the high-paid tax reps and lawyers and everything else, and to try and weasel the way out of paying. So I'm usually keeping myself on that to try and keep an eye on that. The occupational tax doesn't go through this office. That is a county, that is through the finance department and the fiscal board and within their budgeting process. So we don't really do anything with that. But in general, I think it goes into the general fund to fund general county services. But that would be a much better question for either the commissioners or maybe some of the administrative heads at the county level. To recap a little bit, I think the big thing to talk about right now is obviously the time of year that we're sitting here. The vast majority of our reassessment notices have gone out, and I'll tell people to watch for those in the mail. They come in a special envelope from us. They have a big red thing on the front of them that says reassessment notice. It's the only thing we send out that has the big red on the front, and we do that on purpose so that people see it. There's a lot of information on that assessment notice that details the appeals process, but just know that the appeals process, the time to appeal it is not when you pay the bill in October. The other things I would hit is just to get some information out there, other ways we can help you. There are a couple exemptions that are available. Most common one we call the homestead exemption. That is, if you are over 65 and it's your primary residence, then you can get $46,350 knocked off your assessment amount. Every year we pull the voter file and find out whoever's turning 65 that year. We send them a birthday letter that says, hey, here's an application, send it in, and you get a little bit of a break on your taxes. That generally, depending on which district you're in, is going to save you between $450 to $550 a year in taxes. Now, I will say, because this comes up every year too, that there is a 1 in 4 chance that the year that you are turning 65 is also the year that you're scheduled to be reassessed. So there's a chance that some of that savings you thought you were going to get is going to be eaten up by your reassessment. And that's not planned. I've been accused before of people going, well, I see what happened. I applied for this and then you reassessed me. And that's not what's going on. But there's a 1 in 4 chance it's going to happen in any given year. So that is one of, related to that exemption, the homestead exemption, is also the disability exemption. It's technically the same exemption, but if you are 100% disabled or you are 70% disabled by the Veterans Administration, you can get a disability exemption, which is the same thing. It knocks 46,350 off your assessment. You can't get both. So if you're over 65 and disabled, the statute only lets me give you one of them. So that's that exemption. The only other exemption that's out there is the agricultural horticultural exemption. If you have over 10 acres, not counting the land that your house is on. So in practical terms, you got 10.3, 10.4 acres. By the time we exclude the area right around your house, you can get an agricultural exemption that will knock the value of your land down. It doesn't affect your house value, but the land then gets valued as based on agricultural lease rates. And it'll save you quite a bit of money on land value. That's if you have over 10 acres. If you have over 5 acres, not accounting your house, so again, more like 5.3, you can get a horticultural exemption, which is really the same thing, but the only difference is in applying for that, you have to provide us proof that you are actually doing some kind of agriculture and selling it for a profit. Now, that doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be anything extreme. You can be raising tomatoes and selling them to your daughter for all I care. If you just make up a receipt that says you're doing that, we can get you in on that horticultural exemption. So those are the big ones. Other than that, so that's exceptions. Other things going on. I don't know if anyone on legislative fronts, obviously the session is ended now, so nothing came out of it that really affected property taxes anyway. There were some bills to expand the homestead exemption that had been talked about at the state level. One of them got through the Senate, but didn't get through the House. The problem with those bills is they require a constitutional amendment, and they have to go on the ballot. So there's only so many things they can put on the ballot at one time, and I think that's probably why it died. But I do think there's some willingness at the state level that they're certainly looking into, as we talk about seniors, that one of the worst parts about this job is when we do hit some big reassessments, seniors who are on a fixed income, who aren't necessarily seeing, well, whether this is true or not for the rest of us, technically as things are inflating from Biden's inflation, et cetera, technically we should be making more. Some of us are, some of us aren't, but they definitely aren't. So they're on a fixed income and a lot of times they can't afford those increases. So there were some talks about trying to expand the homestead exemption, but that would be next year if it's going to be any time. And then three other really quick things that this office does. We do work with the county clerk's office on motor vehicle taxation. We don't really have a lot of leeway in valuing your vehicle that you pay your property tax on for the county clerk. It's mainly the state uses JD Power to value it. But if you have unusually high mileage or there's damage to it or something, we do have a little bit of leeway. We can give you a little bit of break on that. It's usually not a lot, but we have a little bit of leeway. We also process tangible for businesses. They have to turn in their tangible personal property tax forms to us every year by May 15th. We basically are the data entry process for that. We enter it in, and then the rest of it gets handled at the state level typically. And then the last thing, oddball issue we handle are 911 dwelling assessments. We don't assess that fee. It's something that the fiscal court came up with a couple of years ago and added onto the property tax bill, that each dwelling unit gets a $75 911 fee. We don't have anything to do with actually getting any of that money other than they pay us a very small fee to tell them how many dwelling units are on each piece of property. So we're really just the record keeping side of that. And then the last thing I was going to say is just a tip for property owners. If you get a reassessment notice, and whether you're going to challenge it or not, if your value goes up, make sure particularly if you have a mortgage and you're escrowing your taxes, make sure you let your mortgage company know. Because by far one of the biggest problems we have, particularly when tax bills come out in the fall, we get people calling us and they say, my mortgage went up $400 a month, and they said it's your fault. And it's not really, but I can understand how people would think it is, because what happens is they got that assessment notice. Their bank didn't know they got an assessment notice, so they're still taking escrow out based on the old amount. And then a year later, when the tax bill comes out, the bank doesn't have enough money in the escrow account to pay the tax bill, so they end up paying more, and now they have a negative balance, and then they up your mortgage payment every month in order to make that up over the course of the next year. So if you know you get that increase from us, then make sure, even if you're not challenging it, make sure you tell your mortgage company. And related to that too, if you buy a new house, make sure you understand what's going on with your escrow amount, because it does happen quite a bit that mortgage companies and the banks, when they set that initial escrow amount for a newly bought property, will go back and look at the prior year's tax bill. And a lot of times that prior year's tax bill was an old value that was a couple years old, and you just paid way more than it might have been previously assessed at $200,000. You just paid $300,000 for it. And so your tax bill is going to be on $300,000 because that's what you paid for it. So if they do your escrow based on what the previous guy was paying, you're going to end up in an escrow deficiency, and you're going to get a bump the next year. So I just plead with people to keep an eye on that escrow balance. I know it's easy to forget. I'm guilty of it myself on my own, but it can come back to bite you if you don't stay on top of it. BoonePVA.ky.gov. Or if you just search Boone PVA on Google, it'll be the first thing that comes up.
You're going to be upset and point your finger at the PVA, but it really sounds like you got a finger pointing at fiscal court and Gary Moore. You got a finger pointing at the school board, and we have a finger pointing at the state legislators. And that's where we need to focus our energy to make any of these changes and to roll back some of these taxes. Because I'm just feeling like we live in the Roman Empire at this point, and we are taxed every which direction we go. And they have surplus. They're rolling in surplus at our schools, and the average family is struggling. So there's an issue when the government's prospering while the citizens are not.
So don't take it on Jonathan.
I appreciate that.
That was my point. Sorry.
No, I very much appreciate that. Everyone else can fight their own battles. I'm happy that because we get enough. I understand why we get blamed, but we are a cog within the system trying to do the best we can to meet because, for instance, this year when we sent our initial tax roll estimations down to the state, they came back and told me I needed to raise another $188 million in residential. I knew they were going to tell me that because I can calculate the goals just like they can. But if I don't raise that amount, which we've gotten to now, and we're not going to raise, we go slightly over that just so we have a little bit of buffer room for appeals, but we're not trying to go any more than we have to. And it's largely dictated by statute. And even the guys downstate, I mean, they're state bureaucrats, and I'm not the biggest fan of state bureaucrats, but in the end, they're administering the laws that are on the books. Not to pat myself on the back too hard, but I've tried to go through them, and I'm pretty good I've got an engineering degree and a math degree, and I've tried to find my way around the formulas and my way around the statutes. And frankly, there's not a lot of them. So in the end, that's where if we want real change as far as how this process works, it has to be in statutory and legislative front.